Has Oscar Piastri really just given Lando Norris the first big surprise of the year within McLaren? Because what happened in the sprint qualification of the Chinese Grand Prix not only left an unexpected result, it also revealed something that could completely change the dynamic within the Papaya team. Norris came into this weekend expecting to lead the charge for McLaren as he has done on so many occasions, but suddenly he found himself with a Piastri much more connected to the car, capable of extracting performance that not even his own teammates seem to fully understand. And the most striking thing is that this occurs just when McLaren still does not have major improvements in the car, which means that the difference is not in the machine, but in who has managed to decipher it first. The big question is now evident. Are we simply seeing a one-off surprise from Piastri or the beginning of a real change in the balance of power within McLaren? The car McLaren competes with at the moment is neither a dominant package nor a simple evolution of what worked in previous seasons. In fact, the team internally recognizes that important improvements are still in development and that this weekend in China does not come accompanied by a major technical update that changes the balance of forces. That means performance depends much more on the driver's ability to understand the car's behavior, find the correct tire window, and precisely manage the hybrid systems and energy during the fastest lap. In such a scenario, small details in driving style can become visible differences on the stopwatch. And precisely that is what began to be noticed when it came time for sprint qualifying. Until that moment, many within the paddock assumed that Norris would continue to be McLaren's clear reference. After all, the Briton had built a very strong relationship with the team's recent cars, and his speed in qualifying had become one of his greatest strengths. However, the new package appears to require a slightly different approach to driving, something Norris is still trying to figure out. He himself has hinted that the current car does not feel as natural in his hands as the cars from previous seasons, which forces him to modify certain ways of attacking corners and managing the pace during fast laps. When a driver feels that the car is not responding exactly as expected, each attempt becomes an exercise in constant adaptation, and that reduces the margin to find the perfect time when it really matters. While Norris was still searching for that point of confidence with the car, the situation on the other side of the garage was very different. Oscar Piastri came to this start of the season with a completely renewed mentality after everything he experienced the previous year. Having been so close to a great achievement and then seeing how the season became complicated in its final stretch was a tough experience, but also a lesson that seems to have transformed his way of approaching races. The Australian has spoken openly about that learning process, explaining that he clearly identified what his weaknesses were and that he worked for months to turn them into strengths. That evolution is not only reflected in his attitude outside the car, but also in the way he approaches each session, with a colder, more calculating mentality and more focused on maximizing every detail of performance. And when it came time to put all that to the test in sprint qualifying at the Chinese Grand Prix, those differences began to become visible. In a session where the margin for error is practically non-existent and where each driver needs to immediately find the right pace, Piastri seemed to have complete control over the car's behavior. His laps conveyed a feeling of fluidity, as if he had found exactly the balance that the car needs to perform at its best on that circuit. At the same time, Norris struggled with small details that prevented him from completing a completely clean lap, something that in such a demanding format can make the difference between being ahead or falling behind even your own teammate. That was the moment when the surprise began to arise within McLaren. Because when a driver manages to extract more performance from the same car in the same conditions, questions inevitably arise about what he is seeing that the other has not yet found. From the outside, the official explanation usually focuses on factors such as the tire window, traffic on the track, or a small error in the fastest lap. But the real background is usually much more complex. What was happening in Shanghai was a perfect example of how adaptation to the car can become the decisive factor when the technical package is not yet fully optimized. This is how this story really begins, with a team that is still trying to understand its own car, with a driver who is seeking to regain total connection with the car, and with another who, almost silently, seems to have found the key before anyone else. And when that combination appears within the same garage, the result is usually a surprise that can completely change the narrative of the weekend. The sprint classification. In this format, there is no room to build rhythm little by little or to correct mistakes throughout the weekend, because the teams barely have one practice session before facing the stopwatch directly. That means every driver must immediately find the right setup, ideal tire temperature, and perfect car balance if they want to have a real chance of setting a competitive time. On a circuit like China, where recent resurfacing and changing grip conditions can completely alter the behavior of the car, that task becomes even more complicated. And in the middle of that demanding scenario is where the difference between Norris and Piastri began to become evident in a way that no one expected within McLaren. From the first moments of the session, Piastri seemed to have a much clearer understanding of how to attack the circuit with this car. His laps showed a natural progression. Each attempt seemed to polish small details and bring him closer to the limit of the car. The confidence with which he launched himself into fast corners, the way he managed energy and the way he prepared acceleration zones indicated that he had found a very strong connection with the car in Shanghai. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, the feeling was very different. Norris was struggling to find that same balance, trying to adjust his driving style to a car's behavior that didn't quite feel completely predictable. And when the driver cannot anticipate exactly how the car will react when entering or exiting a corner, each attempt at a fast lap becomes a risky bet. The real difference appeared when the decisive moment of the session arrived, that last phase in which the drivers have to execute the perfect lap if they want to put themselves in a competitive position for the sprint. In that instant, Piastri was able to put together all the necessary elements: tires in the correct window, a balanced car, and clean execution in each sector of the circuit. His lap conveyed the feeling of complete control, as if he had figured out exactly what the McLaren needed to perform at its best in Shanghai. It wasn't simply a matter of pure speed. It was the precision with which each sector was constructed that made the difference. For Norris, however, that moment was much more complicated. He tried to squeeze the car on the final lap, but small details began to appear just when he most needed perfect execution. A slight blockage, a line that wasn't exactly ideal, or a minimal loss of traction may seem like insignificant errors from the outside, but in such a tight classification they are enough to compromise the entire lap time. And when those details appear late in the session, the driver immediately knows he has missed an important opportunity. These types of situations had already happened before in Shanghai for Norris, where his base pace was competitive but an imperfect lap at the key moment ended up making the difference. What made this situation so striking was the contrast between both drivers in the same session. While Norris tried to rebuild a competitive lap after those small errors, Piastri completed a turn that placed him as the team's internal reference. Inside the McLaren garage, that result inevitably generated a surprised reaction. Not because Piastri does not have the ability to achieve it, but because the difference in adaptation to the car appeared much clearer than many expected. When two drivers share exactly the same car and one of them seems to better understand how to extract his potential on a specific circuit, that always attracts attention within the team. And that's where a much more interesting narrative for the rest of the weekend begins to emerge. Because what happened in sprint qualifying was not simply a better executed fastest lap, but a sign that Piastri could be finding solutions to the car's behavior that Norris is still searching for. In a long season, these types of initial differences can become an important factor if they are maintained over time, especially when the team is still trying to understand the true potential of its technical package. Thus, the sprint classification of the Chinese Grand Prix ended up leaving more than just a starting grid for the short race. It left a very clear image within McLaren: a Piastri who seemed to have figured out the car in Shanghai, and a Norris who watched his teammate achieve that performance while he was still trying to find the same connection. And when that type of dynamic appears within a team that aspires to fight at the top of the championship, each session begins to have a much greater weight in the story that is being built. Within a Formula One team, differences between teammates are always analyzed with a magnifying glass, especially when both drivers have exactly the same tools. Engineers review telemetry, compare lines, observe the use of the accelerator, the way of braking, and the way in which each driver manages the energy of the hybrid system. And it is precisely in this type of analysis where the small clues begin to appear that explain why one of the two was able to extract more performance from the car on a specific circuit. In Shanghai, everything indicates that Piastri managed to find a way of working with the car that allowed him to maximize its potential, while Norris was still in the adaptation process that this new technical package requires. But the most interesting thing about all this is not only what happened in the sprint classification, but what that result can mean in the long term within McLaren. When two drivers share a team and one of them begins to feel more comfortable with the car than the other, the internal dynamics can begin to change very quickly. Norris continues to be a huge reference within the team and no one doubts his speed, but seeing Piastri so connected to the car on a circuit like Shanghai inevitably opens a new narrative within the championship. Because if the Australian manages to repeat that type of performance on other weekends, the internal battle could become much more intense than many imagined at the beginning of the season. The sprint classification of the Chinese Grand Prix ended up leaving an image that many within McLaren probably did not expect to see so early in the season. It was not simply a difference in times between teammates, but a clear demonstration of how adaptation to the car can completely change the balance within the same garage. Oscar Piastri achieved something that at the time seemed difficult, connecting with the behavior of the car on a complicated circuit and extracting a performance that surprised even Lando Norris, who until now had been the team's natural reference in many qualifying sessions. For Norris, this session in Shanghai leaves an important lesson. The car's potential is there, but it still needs to find that complete connection that allows it to be exploited in the most decisive moments of a fast lap. In Formula One, the smallest details, the way you manage energy, the exact moment to attack a corner, the way to get the tires into their perfect window, can be the difference between dominating a session or staring at the times from behind. And what we saw in this sprint classification is precisely how a driver can get ahead in that adaptation process even within the same team. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.